A single sniffle echoed through the underground garage, and in that fragile sound, a story began. Imagine a man who had everything: power, wealth, influence, yet nothing prepared him for the moment he discovered a frightened little girl hiding in the shadows. She whispered just 5 words that shattered his world. "Please, don't tell them I'm here." From that instant, his life of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals collided with a truth far more powerful than any empire he had built. This is not just a story about fortune or loss, but about the kind of love and courage that is found in the most unexpected places. If you believe that even the coldest hearts can be warmed, and that family is sometimes chosen, not born, then stay with us. Subscribe to the Retold Stories and let this journey touch your soul. The hum of a luxury engine faded into the shadows of the underground garage. The night was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that felt deliberate, as though the city above had decided to pause for just a moment. James Whittaker, a man whose name echoed in boardrooms across the nation, stepped out of his sleek black Bentley. His polished Italian shoes clicked against the polished cement, the sound sharp in the cavernous stillness. He looked every inch the image of control, a navy overcoat draped neatly across his shoulders, a silk tie loosened just enough to suggest exhaustion, but not weakness. A Rolex caught the faint glow of the motion sensor light, reflecting a life of victories and sacrifices. In one hand, he carried a phone that never stopped buzzing, a reminder of his empire's endless demands. In the other, his briefcase, a burden that felt heavier tonight than it ever had before. James scrolled through his notifications with mechanical detachment. 12 emails from impatient board members, 3 flagged investment inquiries, a sharp alert from his legal counsel. His eyes lingered on a video message from his sister. Ella had turned 7 today. The frozen frame of her tiny hands clapping over a cupcake sat on his screen. For a brief second, the corner of his lips almost softened. Almost. But then he hit delete. He told himself he didn't have time. He always told himself that. As he adjusted the weight of his briefcase and turned toward the elevator, something unusual broke the rhythm of his night. A sound, faint, hesitant. It wasn't the echo of tires or the shuffle of a valet. It was softer, a sniffle, small and fragile, like the kind a child makes when holding back tears too long. James stopped mid-step, the air in his chest catching. His instincts, sharpened years ago on dusty roads in Afghanistan, prickled like ice water along his spine. He turned slowly, scanning the dim corners of the garage. Shadows stretched long across the cement pillars, flickering under the erratic glow of the motion lights. Then he saw it. A small figure crouched low against the wall near the emergency exit. He approached cautiously, each step deliberate, as though one wrong move might shatter the fragile moment. What he found made his throat tighten. A little girl, no more than 6, sat curled into herself. She wore no coat despite the chill, her socks worn thin, her dress faded and fraying at the seams. A purplish bruise colored her cheek, still fresh. Her hair was tangled, her knees drawn tight to her chest. A red sticker clung weakly to her wrist, peeling at the edges. James lowered himself slowly, careful not to frighten her. "Hey," he said softly, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "Are you okay?" The girl flinched, but didn't run. Instead, her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please don't tell them I'm here." 5 words. That was all it took to unravel the armor James had spent decades building around himself. He felt something in his chest tighten, something he thought he had buried with ambition and years of calculated detachment. "I won't," he said gently. "I promise." He shrugged off his overcoat and draped it across her small shoulders. She didn't resist. Her tiny frame nearly disappeared inside the folds of fabric. "What's your name?" he asked, but the silence lingered. Her fingers twitched against the fabric, nervous, but her gaze stayed glued to the floor. "I'm James," he continued, his tone softer than he'd used in years. "I work upstairs. Are you lost?" She shook her head slightly, finally raising her eyes to meet his. They were too big for her face, rimmed red, not from tears, but from holding them back far too long. There was no filth on her, no dirt. She wasn't abandoned in the typical sense. She was eroded, piece by piece, by something less visible, but far more cruel. He swallowed hard. "Are you hurt?" She hesitated, then whispered her name for the first time. Laya. James forced a small smile. Hi, Laya. You're safe now. But the words barely left his mouth before her next sentence broke him in a way no hostile takeover or failed negotiation ever could. The last man said I'd forget things too, like Mommy did. James blinked, stunned. What do you mean? But she curled back into herself, retreating behind a wall of silence. He wanted to press, but something about her small frame, trembling under the weight of a world too heavy for her, held him back. His phone buzzed again, in his pocket urgent notifications. Meetings. Responsibilities waiting upstairs. But for the first time in years, James ignored it. Instead, he stayed kneeling in the cold garage, staring at a child who seemed to have stepped out of the shadows and into his life with nothing but pain and quiet defiance. Without fully realizing it, he reached for her hand. She didn't take it, but she didn't pull away either. The motion light above flickered once, then steadied, bathing them in a dim halo. It felt like a fragile truce between two broken worlds. James had spent his life calculating risks, predicting outcomes, and sealing deals worth billions. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the fragile girl shivering in his coat, whispering not to be found. For reasons he couldn't name, James knew he couldn't walk away, not tonight, not ever. And so the man who thought he had seen it all, who believed nothing could shake him, discovered the beginning of a story that would change everything. James carried the small girl through the marble lobby of Whitaker Tower, her fragile frame hidden beneath his overcoat. The concierge blinked in surprise, but James's tone left no room for questions. No, I've got it, he said firmly, moving past security, as if the world itself had narrowed down to this single responsibility, keeping her safe. In the quiet of the executive lounge, he placed her gently on a velvet couch. She curled into herself, knees pulled tight, the coat swallowing her whole. James loosened his tie, pacing, torn between logic and instinct. His phone buzzed again, board alerts, overseas investors, a press inquiry, but he silenced it with a single motion. The silence between them pressed heavier than any corporate burden he had ever carried. She hadn't spoken again. Her eyes drifted to the ceiling as though searching for something only she could see. James tried to rationalize. This isn't my job. This isn't my child. Call child services. Let someone else handle it. He even took a step toward the elevator. But then he felt it, the softest tug on his sleeve. Her hand, so small it barely wrapped around the fabric, clung to him without words. He froze. That single touch held more weight than the signatures of entire boards of directors. He sat back down, his voice gentler than it had been in years. What happened to you, Laya? Her answer came like a thread unraveling from a torn seam. Mom sleeps a lot now. Greg gives her the stickers, says it helps. She lifted her wrist, revealing the peeling red patch. James's stomach tightened. He knew that kind of clinical label, that sterile cruelty hidden behind research codes. He had once overseen trials himself, long before he rose to power. He recognized the hollow marks of something not yet meant for human skin. The next evening, unable to sit idle, he drove her to the address scribbled on the hospital band around her wrist. The building looked less like a home and more like a forgotten motel converted halfway into something worse. The stairwell smelled of mildew and burnt plastic. At the top, Laya opened a faded green door without knocking. The sight inside would haunt him forever. A woman lay on a stained mattress, mid-30s, but worn by years of neglect. Her arms were lined with the same red patches, skin raised in angry welts. Her breathing was shallow, erratic, her lips tinged gray. Laya whispered, "Mommy," as she knelt beside her. James crouched close enough to feel the chill radiating from the woman's skin. No water bottles, no food, only a crumpled fast food bag, days old, and a clinical package marked NBX 42, trial use only, not for distribution. James's chest tightened. He had once approved budgets for compounds like these, though he had long since left the laboratories behind. But here it was in a decaying room, stuck to the skin of a mother who couldn't even open her eyes. Rage clawed at his composure. This wasn't negligence. This was a crime. He dialed 911, his voice calm and efficient, the same tone he used in hostile takeovers. Within minutes, EMTs arrived. Severely dehydrated, blood pressure collapsing, one muttered as they lifted Isabel onto a stretcher. James handed them the sealed patches. The medic frowned, whispering, "Never seen this outside trial labs. Where the hell did she get this?" James didn't answer. He already suspected. At the hospital, while Isabel was stabilized under an alias, James sat beside Laia in a private room. She hadn't touched the juice or cartoons the staff gave her. She sat still, clutching the bunny James had bought her, though she refused to meet his eyes. He remembered his sister at that age, before he buried himself in work, before ambition devoured everything tender in his life. Later that night, as the city outside glittered in cold wealth, James dug through encrypted archives from his company's shuttered divisions. He found what he feared: NBXP, a continuation of NBX 42, designed for children with trauma backgrounds. They weren't testing cures, they were testing control. Emails spoke of memory conditioning, parental proxy consents, and recommendations for continued exposure. His hands shook as he closed the laptop. The following day, he sought out Dr. Sienna Lee, a scientist who had once been laughed out of conferences for warning against such compounds. She looked older now, weathered but sharp. Her hands trembled as she examined the packaging. "They've strengthened it," she murmured. "This isn't treatment. It's exploitation. Knox is behind this. I warned them years ago." James's jaw tightened. Gregory Knox had been his rival once, a man obsessed with pushing boundaries regardless of human cost. Now he was resurfacing, targeting the most vulnerable. An anonymous email later confirmed James's worst fears. "You're not supposed to look into NBX. Drop it, or she disappears too." He deleted it without hesitation, but the real threat came silently. At 3:42 a.m., the hidden camera James installed captured a man in teal scrubs, bypassing the locked cabinets and approaching Isabel's room. Beneath the mask, James recognized the face instantly. Gregory Knox. He hadn't broken in, he'd bought access. Betrayal ran deeper than James imagined. Then, as if Knox's shadow alone had triggered it, Laia collapsed. Her small body convulsed, monitors blaring in chaos. Doctors shouted orders. "She's in acute neurological crisis," one called out. James could only watch, through the glass, heart pounding, powerless as the girl who had reached for his sleeve now slipped away before his eyes. And in that moment, James Whitaker, the man who thought his empire defined him, realized that no wealth, no empire, no power could mean anything if he failed to save her. The monitors shrieked in erratic tones, lights flashing as Laia's body convulsed on the hospital bed. Nurses scrambled, lines were switched, voices collided with urgent commands. James stood frozen at the glass, fists clenched so hard his knuckles whitened. He had fought hostile takeovers, endured war zones, negotiated against men with no conscience. But nothing had ever terrified him like watching the small child who had whispered, "Don't tell them I'm here now, fighting for her life." Dr. Sienna Lee's voice broke through the chaos. "It's not viral, it's synthetic, a parasite feeding on her neural pathways." She pointed at the glowing scans, where Laia's blood cells shimmered unnaturally. James's stomach dropped. Weeks, maybe months of exposure to the experimental patches had been rewriting her body. If they killed it too quickly, her brain could be irreparably damaged. If they did nothing, her nervous system would collapse. "Is there any option?" James demanded, voice shaking. Sienna hesitated, then met his eyes. "You told me you were part of the V92 military vaccine trial years ago. It left you with anomalies in your immune system, markers no one else carries. If we can extract them, we might design a recombinant serum that bonds with the parasite. But James, it's untested. Risky for both of you." James didn't flinch. He rolled up his sleeve. "Do it. I wasn't there when she needed someone. I won't leave her now." Minutes later, he lay on a gurney as tubes siphoned his blood through filtration chambers. The machines hummed, glowing with soft blue light, separating components, recombining anomalies into something entirely new. Outside the glass, Laia lay limp in the isolation chamber, her chest rising shallowly. James couldn't tear his gaze away. His voice cracked as he whispered, "She called me Daddy yesterday, like it wasn't a question." Sienna's hands trembled as she prepared the serum. a shimmering, iridescent liquid that looked like captured light. At 3:26 p.m., she injected it into Laya's IV. Silence followed. 10 seconds. 20. Then the monitors flatlined. No! James slammed his hand against the glass. Nurses grabbed defibrillators. Voices shouted. But before the shock could be delivered, a faint beep returned, followed by another, then a steady rhythm. Breath returned to the room. Tears stung James's eyes as relief crashed through him. Moments later, across the hall, another miracle stirred. Isabel, pale and weak, opened her eyes for the first time in weeks. Her lips cracked as she whispered, "Where's my baby?" James nearly collapsed under the weight of it all. Against all odds, both mother and child had been pulled back from the brink. The following morning, snow fell in slow flakes outside the hospital, muffling the world as if nature itself understood something sacred had happened. Laya slept peacefully, her tiny hand curling instinctively when James placed his palm beside hers. Isabel, though fragile, sat upright, her eyes clearer than they had been in months. She looked at James and said simply, "You stayed." Later, James met with Ross Delaney, a federal investigator. He handed over everything hidden surveillance of Knox, archived emails, sealed patches. Ross's expression hardened. "This confirms what we suspected. Knox won't escape this time." That night, Interpol caught Gregory Knox at the Canadian border with forged documents and a case full of altered compounds. For the first time in weeks, James allowed himself to breathe. But victory wasn't only in courtrooms. It was in the fragile trust Laya slowly placed in him. One morning, she left a single butterscotch candy on his briefcase, her only treasure. Another day, she slipped Oscar Bunny into his arms, whispering, "So you don't forget." James, who had spent a lifetime chasing recognition in glossy magazines, realized these quiet gestures meant more than any award. When guardianship papers were filed, he hesitated, not wanting to take Laya from Isabel. But the lawyer assured him, "This isn't about replacing her mother. It's about protection, about partnership." And so, custody was shared, born not of contracts, but of love, forged in crisis. Weeks later, the three of them stepped out of the hospital together. Instead of returning to his penthouse of glass and silence, James drove them to a coastal cottage in Santa Rosa Beach. The air smelled of salt and possibility. Laya ran barefoot across the sand, laughter ringing against the waves, while Isabel sat wrapped in a blanket, tears in her eyes as she whispered, "She's free." One evening, Laya etched a heart in the wet sand. Inside it, she wrote 3 names: Mom, me, Dad. James's throat tightened. She looked up, smiling softly, and said, "This way, we never forget." He knelt beside her, the ocean tide brushing at their feet, and for the first time, James believed he had finally found what he'd been missing all his life. Months later, he stood before cameras at a medical conference. Behind him glowed the banner of the new Laya Foundation, its mission clear: no child should ever be the price of progress. He confessed his failures, admitted his blind trust in systems that exploited the vulnerable. And then he spoke of the girl who had hidden in his parking lot, who had taught him what it meant to fight for something real. Back at the cottage, Laya watched the clip on Isabel's laptop. She smiled and pointed. "He looks serious when he's helping." Isabel laughed softly. "He is serious, because he loves you." That night, under the silver moonlight, the 3 of them walked the shoreline hand in hand. Laya stopped, drew another heart in the sand, then encircled it with a larger one. "This one's us," she said. "So we never forget." James bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "So am I, sweetheart. You found me before I even knew I was lost." And outside, the wind carried the sound of waves and a promise. Beginnings are often hidden in the most unexpected places. Some stories are written in boardrooms, carved into glass towers, sealed with signatures and celebrated with applause. But the ones that stay, the ones that truly matter, are not written in ink or marble. They are whispered in the dark corners of parking garages, carried in the fragile hands of a child clutching a toy bunny, or in the quiet decision of a man who finally chooses love over power. James Whittaker never planned to be a father. He never planned to trade billion-dollar deals for bedtime stories, or to measure his worth not by profits, but by the trust in a little girl's eyes. Yet life has a way of tearing down walls we thought were unbreakable and guiding us toward the moments that redefine who we are. For James, it was the night he heard a small voice whisper, "Please, don't tell them I'm here." From that moment, his world shifted. He fought against corporations that valued profit over people. He stood up to men who believed children could be test subjects. And he risked everything to save a life that wasn't supposed to be his responsibility, but became his purpose. In saving Laya, he discovered something far greater than redemption. He discovered family. And family is not always written in blood. Sometimes it is chosen in the quiet spaces, where love demands courage. Sometimes it begins with a single act of staying, when leaving would have been easier. Sometimes it is drawn in the sand, by small hands that believe hearts can hold us together. If this story stirred something inside you, if it did too, reminded you that love can be found in unexpected places, that healing is possible even after betrayal, then remember there are countless more tales waiting to be told. Stories of courage, sacrifice, redemption, and the quiet victories that shape our lives. Here, on the Retold Stories, we share them with you not to entertain alone, but to remind you of the resilience of the human spirit, to remind you that even on the hardest nights, there is still light. To remind you that tomorrow is always a gift. So if you believe in stories that touch your heart, if you want to be part of a community that chooses compassion over indifference, then stay with us. Let these stories guide you, comfort you, and inspire you. Click subscribe and join the Retold Stories, because sometimes the most important chapters of our lives are not the ones we expect, but the ones we choose to hold on to.